Greetings, folks. For Ag and Natural Resources Marketing, I'm David Ammon, and you're watching Renew, the show about the amazing students, faculty, and staff of the College of Forest Resources at Mississippi State University. Our first guest today is Dr. Christine Fortune. Dr. Fortune is an assistant professor in the Department of Forestry and a scientist in the FWRC. Dr. Fortune, you've been with us before, back in June of 2023.
I have, yes.
Well, welcome back to the show.
Thank
it's a pleasure
you.
to have you. Absolutely.
It's good to be here.
Absolutely. Dr. Fortune, you study beneficial invertebrates and manage forests, specifically forest management practices that improve or increase the invertebrate biodiversity in the forest. Can you speak a little about what that research looks like? Are there particular insects you're studying?
There are particular insects that I study. So I focus mostly on pollinators in the forest, and specifically bees. So when I say bees, most people think about the honeybee, right?
Sure.
The honeybee is actually not a native species. It was imported from Europe.
Right.
In the meanwhile, we have 4,000 native bee species in the United States.
4,000?
4,000.
Wow. Yeah.
And the number in Mississippi is around 400 native species of bees that we have. And when you move from the agricultural environment into a more natural setting like a forest, pretty much all of the pollination work is being done by those native bees.
Sure.
Right. Honeybees really only exist where people are because they're a domestic species, right? We keep them. So they tend to be in the agriculture environment, sometimes in the urban environment, but not so much in the forest. You don't really find them there. So in forest environments and forest understory environments and prairies and all of our other natural ecosystems, we really depend on these wild and native bees for pollination services. And when I started this work, these groups were really understudied, especially in forest systems. In the meanwhile, that was about 10 years ago when I started this work. In the meanwhile, there's a pretty good body of literature that has developed since then, including mine and several other individuals who've done some work on this. And so we have a much better understanding now of our wild bee communities in southeastern forests, and how our management practices affect those species.
Right. Yeah, you've spent a good portion of your career working for the EPA in pesticide regulations. How does that experience inform your work at MSU? Are you also looking at pesticides or herbicides used in forest management and its effect on beneficial invertebrates?
I am. So when I was working at EPA, one of the things that EPA does is that we register pesticides for use in the United States, right? All pesticides have to undergo registration with EPA.
Sure.
Part of that registration process is what's called ecological risk assessment, right? Where we look at the ecological endpoints, the toxicity to certain species, and we look at how the chemical moves through the environment. So where is the chemical going? What concentrations is it ending up in? What organisms are exposed to it? And what's their toxicity level? I teach a whole course on this, by the way, called Ecological Risk Assessment, if everybody's interested in learning more about that.
Nice.
But one of the things that frustrated me a little bit when I was working at EPA, and this has changed a bit in the meanwhile, is that the ecological risk assessments for bees was exclusively relative to honeybees, right? So we talked about how honeybees are not a native species, right? The assumption was always that, well, you know, if we understand how the chemicals affect honeybees, well, then that will protect all the other bee species. But the fundamental problem is that honeybees interact with the environment very differently than our native bees do. Specifically, they don't interact with the soil, right? Honeybees just go from their hive to a flower back to their hive. Our native bees, nearly all of them interact with the soil in some way. They either nest in the soil, so they actually excavate nests under the ground, or they collect soil to build nests. So they're interacting with the soil where residues in the soil could affect them in a way that honeybees are not affected. Right. So one of the issues that I wanted to tackle first in my PhD research was how do residues in the soil affect wild bees, and specifically residues of chemicals that we use in forestry, orchard, and nursery applications. So I looked at a class of chemicals called imidacloprid, or called neonicotinoids, specifically imidacloprid, which is the most commonly used one. It's used as a soil drench, so that it's taken up by the tree into the tree tissue, right, and it protects the tree from sap-feeding insects, right, from phloem-feeding insects, which is really important, obviously, especially in nursery and orchard applications, but it's also used in forestry in some instances. It definitely stays in the soil for a long time. It has a long half-life in the soil, and residues can be in the soil for a long time after application. Right. Since most of our native bees, again, interact with the soil, I was looking at that particular pathway and how that affects our wild bees. Right. Found some very interesting things relative to that. In the meanwhile, the risk assessments that EPA does, they're starting to take into account our native and wild bees and these other pathways that they utilize, that they're exposed to in their risk assessments. So it is making a difference in terms of how we assess pesticides in the U.S.
That's fascinating research. One area of interest for you is the National Resource and Environmental Conservation major.
Correct.
How is this major different than the traditional forestry major? What careers can a graduate pursue?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different than the traditional forestry major in that, for one thing, it's a little bit broader, as I say it. So we're looking at not just the forest itself, but the various other resources that affect the forest. So water and soil. We look more broadly at biodiversity and managing biodiversity. We look at just the broader picture of sort of environmental conservation.
Sure.
So for folks who are really interested in conservation and kind of the bigger picture, it's a little more multidisciplinary. We explore beyond the forest in the NREC program, right? A little bit in wetlands and coastal systems and things like that, as well as forests.
That's awesome.
So people who have been through the NREC program, a lot of them, we have a couple different concentrations within the NREC program. One of them is law and administration, and many of those students want to go on to law school, for example, and become environmental attorneys or attorneys that focus on natural resource issues.
Sure.
Right. We also have a natural resource technology concentration, so those folks are kind of interested in GIS applications as well as other types of spatial technologies and how to utilize those in conservation. And then we have a natural resource science concentration, so those individuals may go into the more science-based applications or natural resource management in terms of some have gone to work for park services, for example, in terms of helping manage natural resources in national parks or state parks. Some of them are interested in environmental consulting, where they will work with private companies to consult on how to best manage their natural resources or, for example, delineate wetlands for development so that we know where the wetlands are and how to minimize the impact on those wetlands when a development goes in or things like that.
It's very broad. Well, Dr. Fortune, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming back.
Really appreciate it.
We're going to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere.
Want a career as big as the outdoors? Want to have an impact on the environment? The College of Forest Resources at Mississippi State University delivers hands-on training, ensuring clean air and water, wildlife habitats, and a sustainable environment. Creating new wood products and retooling old ones for today and tomorrow. Find a career in whatever path you choose. Majors in forestry, natural resource and environmental conservation, sustainable bioproducts, wildlife, fisheries, and aquaculture. Want a career as big as the outdoors? Choose the College of Forest Resources at Mississippi State University.
Welcome back. Our next guest is Mary McTeague. She just received her master's in August in forestry, and now she's working on her PhD with Dr. Fortune. Mary, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little about yourself? Where are you from, and why did you choose Mississippi State?
Yeah, so I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota. That's where I grew up. And then for undergrad, I went to Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, where I studied environmental science and English literature. I graduated in 2022. And right after that, I got a job at the Jones Center at HOA, working as a technician in their forest invertebrates lab. And through that position, I got to learn more about the role of invertebrates in longleaf pine ecosystems specifically, and I really loved it. I had a great time. And through that position, one of my coworkers actually heard about a master's position at Mississippi State, where you get to study native bee populations in montane longleaf pine forests with Dr. Fortune, and it sounded like perfect to me, exactly what I wanted to do.
Sure, you've definitely come to the right place.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
so that's how I ended up here.
Awesome. As hunters begin to think about the opening of deer season, your study may not be a topic that they've considered. You're studying the relationship between pollinators and other wildlife communities, namely white-tailed deer. Tell us a little bit about this intriguing study.
Yeah, so this is going to be the subject of my PhD that I'm just starting.
Sure.
And essentially our goal is to quantify the relationship between pollinators and white-tailed deer. So deer, like people and most other things, to be the most healthy need sort of a varied diet with different sources of nutrition, vitamins, that type of thing. And because they're herbivores, like plants are what provide that. A lot of plants are insect pollinated. So our goal is to see which pollinator communities support the plants that would result in the healthiest deer population.
Nice. That's pretty neat. You've also found that the history of the land matters when it comes to pollinators, particularly for the sites that were prior forest plantations versus sites that naturally regenerated. What did you find?
Yes, this was a subject of my master's research where we compared previous hardwood encroached montane longleaf pine to previous loblolly plantation replanted montane longleaf pine. And we found that while this difference seemed to impact plant communities a little bit more, bee communities did differ in terms of functional divergence, specifically in terms of nesting groups. So bees nest in all different things, the ground, softwood, cavities, leaf litter, et cetera.
Right.
And in the previous hardwood encroached forests, it seemed like there was maybe more of a variety of nesting types available to the bees because it had a higher functional divergence for those communities.
Makes sense. How do pollinators impact restoration of forests?
They impact them a lot because they support the flowering plant community. So any understory flowering plants, pollinators will be super important in helping that reestablish and remain healthy. They're responsible for gene flow between different flowering plant communities. So they help sort of maintain genetic diversity, plant biodiversity, which in turn is a food source for lots of other wildlife that you would want in your restored ecosystem.
It's fascinating stuff. What are your future plans? What type of career do you envision for yourself with all this research?
Yeah, well, I'll be doing this PhD for the next few years, but I love research, so I would love to have a career that lets me continue to do research, maybe through university or something.
Awesome, awesome. Well, Mary, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That's going to be it for this episode of Renew. Thank you for joining us. If you'd like to watch previous editions, you can go to cfr.msstate.edu. There you'll find all of our other socials, or you can check us out on YouTube at CFR Vids. Thank you so much for watching.